He hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept in a real bed in 4, and the city that once bowed to his name now stepped over him like garbage on the sidewalk. Then a woman knelt in the rain, pressed her last dollar into his hand and looked him in the eye like he was still a man worth seeing. He didn't know yet that loving her would mean burning his own empire to the ground to keep her alive. Welcome to Afro K Love Diaries. Please like, share, and subscribe. Kang Min-ho had $11 billion, a name that made grown men lower their eyes, and a hunger that no amount of money had ever touched. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was nobody. Tonight, he was cold, wet, and invisible, sitting against a brick wall in an alley 3 blocks from the very tower that carried his name in gold letters 40 stories high. And in exactly 9 minutes, a woman named Zara was going to walk past him and change the rest of his life without even knowing his name. 3 weeks earlier, Min-ho stood in his father's old office on the 61st floor of Kang Tower, staring at a portrait of a man he had spent his whole life trying not to become. His father had built an empire on fear. Min-ho had inherited it at 26, the same year his father's heart gave out during a hostile takeover call, mid-sentence, mid-threat, the phone still warm in his hand when security found him. Since then, Min-ho had doubled the company's value, crushed 3 attempted buyouts, and buried every rival who tried to test him. He was 32 years old and he could not remember the last time he had laughed without calculating who was watching him do it. His grandmother was the only person who still called him by his childhood nickname. She was dying slowly in a private hospital wing that overlooked the Han River, and she had one request that Min-ho could not refuse. "Before I go," she told him, her hand thin and cold in his, "I want to know you have loved something that could never be bought." He had laughed at first, the bitter kind of laugh that came from a man who had forgot how to hope. She had not laughed with him. "I am not joking, Min-ho. Everyone who has ever looked at you has seen the company first and the man never. I want you to know what it feels like to be seen for nothing. Go and find out, before it is too late for both of us." That was how the most powerful man in the country ended up in a thrift store, buying a stained gray hoodie and a pair of boots 2 sizes too big, telling his driver to disappear for 30 days and his head of security, a broad, quiet man named Director O, to watch from a distance and never under any circumstance be seen. The first week nearly broke him. Not the cold, though the cold was brutal. Not the hunger, though his stomach had never once in his life gone that long empty. What broke him was the invisibility. Men in suits like the ones he used to wear stepped over his legs without looking down. Women pulled their children closer when they passed him like poverty was contagious. A police officer told him to move along in a tone Min-ho had never once been spoken to in his entire life, and he obeyed because that was the rule he had set for himself. No name, no money, no power, just a man watching how the world treated a man it believed had nothing. By the second week, he had stopped expecting anyone to look at him at all. Then it rained. Zara Bennett was 27 years old and had been running on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee for longer than she wanted to admit. She had come to Seoul 2 years ago on a design fellowship that fell through after 8 months, and instead of going home to Houston with her tail between her legs, she had stayed, stitched together a life out of freelance graphic work and long shifts at a bakery in Itaewon, and told herself every single week that it was almost worth it. Her mother had passed when Zara was 19. Her father was somewhere in Texas she didn't think about anymore. She had exactly one photograph of her family left, tucked into the corner of a cracked phone case, and a stubborn, bone-deep belief that had been carved into her by a grandmother long gone. You give what you can, even when you have nothing, because somebody once did that for you. That belief was the only reason she stopped in the rain outside a convenience store in Mapo, exhausted, soaked, 12,001 in her pocket that was supposed to be dinner, and saw a man sitting against the wall who hadn't moved in what looked like hours. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't holding a sign. He was just sitting there, soaked through a thin gray hoodie, staring at nothing, like a man who had run out of places to be. Something about the stillness of him stopped her feet before her brain caught up. She crouched down in front of him. "Hey," she said softly in careful and perfect Korean, then switched to English when she saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. "You okay? You've been sitting here a while." Min-ho looked up at her, and for one strange, unguarded second, something moved behind his ribs that he did not have a name for. "I'm fine," he said, which was a lie he had gotten disturbingly good at telling. "Not," she said, not unkindly, just plainly the way you'd correct a fact. She reached into her bag, pulled out the small paper container of leftover pastries she'd been given at closing, day-olds the bakery couldn't sell, and pressed it into his hands. "It's not much, but it's warmish. Eat something." He stared at the box like it was the strangest object he had ever been handed. He had signed contracts worth more than small nations without blinking. This undid him. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," Zara said, standing, pulling her soaked jacket tighter. "Doesn't mean I won't." She was 3 steps away when she turned back, almost as an afterthought. "There's a shelter 2 blocks that way on World Cup Row. They don't ask questions. Go before it gets colder." Then she disappeared into the rain, and Min-ho sat there holding a box of stale pastries like it was the deed to something sacred, watching the space where she'd been. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the safe house Director O had arranged 3 streets over, the pastry box on the table in front of him untouched, and he understood with a kind of quiet terror that he needed to know her name. It wasn't hard to find her. A man with his resources could find anyone in the country within a day. He didn't. Instead, the next evening he put the hoodie back on, He found her leaving the bakery near midnight, apron balled under her arm, exhaustion written into every line of her shoulders. She spotted him half a block down and her whole tired face changed, softened, like she was glad, actually glad, to see a stranger she'd fed once in the rain. "Hey you," she said. "Did you find the shelter?" "I did," he lied. "Thank you for yesterday." "Mention it." She studied him for a second, head tilted. "You look like you haven't slept." "Managing," he said. "Managing isn't the same as okay," she said, and something about the phrase landed somewhere deep and old in him, like she'd reached into a locked room without meaning to. "Come on, there's a place around the corner still open. I'll get you something hot." "You gave me your dinner yesterday," he said. "You can't keep feeding a stranger." She laughed, and it changed her whole face, made her look younger, brighter, like the tiredness had lifted for exactly as long as the laugh lasted. "Honey, I've been broke my whole life. Feeding people is basically my love language." She jerked her chin toward the light spilling from the noodle shop on the corner. "So come on, don't make a liar out of me." Kang Min-ho, chairman of Kang Holdings, a man who negotiated the fate of companies over lunch, followed a woman who owned almost nothing into a two-table noodle shop and let her buy him dinner with money she could not afford to spend. It became a thing without either of them deciding it was a thing. She started finishing her shifts and glancing down the block, half hopping, half embarrassed to be hopping that he'd be there. He started timing his evenings around the moment the bakery's lights clicked off. They sat on the curb outside the shuttered shop and shared whatever she'd been able to save from the day. And they talked in the easy, unguarded way of two people who each believed the other had nothing to gain by pretending. She told him about Houston, about a mother whose laugh she was terrified of forgetting, about a design fellowship that had promised her the world and then quietly, politely taken it back. She told him she still sent money to her cousin back home whenever she could, not much but something, because somebody's got to be the one who doesn't stop trying. She asked him things no one had asked him in years. Not what do you do, not how much are you worth. She asked if he was lonely. She asked one night, staring up at the skyline that included the tower with his own name on it, what he would have wanted to be if life hadn't decided for him. "A pianist," he said before he could stop himself. He hadn't told anyone that in over a decade. "My father called it a waste of a good mind." "Me something sometime," she said, simple as breathing, like it wasn't the most natural thing in the world to say to a man she thought owned nothing. And Kang Min-ho, who had spent his entire adult life being needed by everyone and known by no one, sat beside this exhausted, generous, luminous woman and understood with a kind of quiet dread that he was already in love with her. The second week, Director O found him at 4 in the morning, sitting on a rooftop 3 buildings from Zara's apartment, watching her window like it was the only light left in the city. "Sir," O said carefully. "This was supposed to be 30 days of observation. It has become something else." "I know what it's become," Min-ho said. "She doesn't know who you are. I know that too. When she finds out, I know that most of all," Min-ho said, and there was something in his voice O had not heard from him since before his father died. Fear. By the third week, the lie had a texture and a weight that pressed on Min-ho every single time she looked at him with that open, unguarded warmth. He told himself he would tell her soon. He told himself every single night, and every single night he watched her laugh at something small and stupid he'd said, and he could not make himself risk losing it. He did not know that fate had already tied a thread between them he could not see. "My little cousin back home got a scholarship," Zara told him one night, eyes bright with a pride that had nothing to do with herself. "Big one, international program, covers everything." I cried for an hour when I found out. First good thing to happen to our family in years. Min-ho went very still beside her because he knew that scholarship. He had signed the approval himself 18 months earlier, one-line item among hundreds in a foundation his grandmother had built decades ago, in memory of a childhood where she'd had nothing and one stranger's kindness had changed everything. He had touched this woman's life before he had ever sat down in that alley. Fate, or something like it, had connected them long before the rain. He didn't tell her, he didn't know how. So he just sat there in the quiet of that impossible coincidence and felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut since the day his father died. Then, on a Thursday night that started like every other, everything came apart. A woman named Saren Yu found him first. She still moved in Min-ho's world, the real one, and when whispers reached her that Kang Min-ho had been seen disheveled and unshaven, lingering around a bakery in Itaewon with some foreign woman, her curiosity curdled fast into something sharper. Saren had wanted Min-ho for herself since university, had watched every woman near him fail to hold his attention, and she was not about to let a stranger in a stained apron succeed where she had not. She found Zara restocking the bakery's front case on a slow afternoon, immaculate in cream and pearls, and looked her over with a slow, cold smile. "So you're the one," Saren said. "The little charity project. This is even better than I imagined." Zara straightened, wiping flour from her hands. "Can I help you with something? You really don't know, do you?" Saren laughed softly, pulled out her phone, tapped it twice, turned the screen toward her. It was Min-ho in a tailored charcoal suit on the cover of a business magazine, the headline beneath his face reading Kang Min-ho, the heir rebolding in Empire. "Your sad little homeless boyfriend. He's not homeless, sweetheart. He's chairman of Kang Holdings, worth more than this entire neighborhood put together." She let the words drip with contempt. He's been playing some little game to find a woman who'd love him for his heart instead of his wallet. And you fell for it beautifully. Zara did not cry, she did not shout, she just felt the floor go cold beneath her feet, felt every late-night conversation, every shared meal, every unguarded confession rearrange itself into something ugly. He had let her feed him with money she could not spare while he had been testing her. When Min-ho came that evening, hoodie and all, she was already waiting outside the bakery, his own face pulled up on her cracked phone screen. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked, her voice didn't shake, which was somehow the worst part. His face fell. Zara, is it true? It's true, he said, because the lie had cost him too much already to add to it now. Long, since the first night, every word cost him something. It started as my grandmother's dying wish, find someone who would love me with nothing. It stopped being a test the moment you handed me that box of pastries. Zara's eyes filled and spilled over despite everything in her fighting to hold them back. I gave you food I couldn't afford because I thought you had less than me. The whole time you could have bought this entire street. She wiped her face hard, angry at her own tears. Do you know what that makes me? A line in some story you're telling yourself, a test you passed. You're not a test, he said, and his voice cracked in a way that had never once happened in a boardroom, in a courtroom, in front of his own board of directors. You stopped being a test the second I met you. I fell in love with you, Zara, not the version of you I was watching, the real one. Don't, she said, stepping back before he could reach for her. Don't follow me, please, just don't. And this time it was Zara who walked away into the dark, and Kang Min-ho, who could buy nearly anything in the world, stood on the wet pavement and understood that some things could not be bought back at any price. His grandmother died 4 days later. She went the way she had lived, quietly on her own terms, his hand in hers until the very end. Her last words to him were not about the company. Did you find her? She whispered. I did, he said, throat raw. And I lost her. Something like mischief flickered in her tired eyes even then. No, she breathed, not yet. He did not understand what she meant until after the funeral, when Director O placed a sealed envelope in his hands. His grandmother had written it weeks earlier with strict instructions. It was not addressed to Min-ho. It was addressed to Zara. Across the city, Zara had already decided to leave Seoul. She could not walk down a single street without a memory ambushing her. She had booked the cheapest flight home she could find and was folding the last of her clothes into a suitcase when a soft knock came at her door. An old woman stood in the hallway, small and sharp-eyed, a driver waiting respectfully a few steps back. My name is Mrs. Han, the woman said gently. I worked for the chairman's grandmother for many years. She asked me to give you this before she passed. She held out a sealed envelope. Read it, then decide whatever you decide. Zara sat on the edge of her half-packed bed and opened a letter written by a woman she had never met. My dear Zara, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my grandson has done something foolish enough to lose you, which tells me he loved you enough to be foolish, and that is how I know what you gave him was real. Let me tell you a secret about Min-ho. He was raised in a house full of money and starved of warmth. His father measured love in numbers. I tried to love him in everything else, but a grandmother is not enough for a boy who grew up believing he was a prize to be won and never once a person to be chosen. Before I died, I asked him to find someone who would love him with nothing. I did not expect him to do something so reckless. I think in truth he was desperate. Desperate to know that somewhere in this world someone would choose him and not his name. And then he found you. A woman with empty hands and a full heart, who gave him everything she had on a rainy night and asked for nothing in return. Child, I know the lie hurt you. He was wrong to keep it. But I am asking you from wherever I am now to look past the foolish thing he did and see the frightened boy underneath it. He has spent his whole life being wanted for the wrong reasons. You are the first person who ever wanted him for the right ones. Do not let my grandson grow old, rich, and alone. I could not bear it, and neither, I think, could you. With love from one woman who gave what she had to another. Grandma Kang. Zara read it twice. Then she pressed it to her chest and cried for the boy in the cold house, for her own tired heart, and for a kind old woman who had seen straight through both of them from her hospital bed. Her suitcase was still packed. She wasn't sure anymore that she was going to use it. She found him in his grandmother's memorial garden, where Mrs. Han said he had gone every evening since the funeral. He did not look like a chairman that night. He looked like a man who had lost the only two people who had ever truly seen him in the same terrible month. When he saw her standing there, the letter in her hand, he went completely still, like moving might make her vanish. She wrote to you, he said. I know, Zara said softly. I didn't ask you to read it. I didn't. It wasn't mine to read. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The garden held its breath around them. You lied to me, she finally said. For weeks. I did. He didn't reach for an excuse, and I will spend as long as it takes being sorry for it. Didn't you just tell me who you were? Because the first time I ever felt like a person and not a name was sitting next to you in the rain, he said, voice breaking. And I was terrified that the second you knew, that would disappear. I was a coward, Zara, I know that now. My grandmother saw what I couldn't say out loud. I didn't fall in love with someone who loved my money. I fell in love with the only person who ever looked at me with nothing and thought I was still worth feeding. Zara looked at him, really looked, not the magazine cover, not the tower with his name on it 40 stories up. The man in the alley who used to be a pianist before his father decided otherwise, the man who listened like it was the only thing he knew how to do well. My mama used to say, she said quietly, you give what you can even when you've got nothing. I gave you the last thing I had that night because that's what she taught me. She crossed the garden slowly and sat beside him on the stone bench, close enough that their shoulders touched, the way they used to on the curb outside the bakery. I guess I can give you one more chance too. Kang Min-ho, who had nearly everything a man could want, closed his eyes and held on to the only thing he had ever truly needed. But peace in Min-ho's world was never allowed to last long. Because 3 days later a black car with tinted windows began parking across from Zara's apartment building, and a man neither of them knew yet was about to remind Min-ho exactly how dangerous it was to love someone in public.